James Perloff is the author of Shadows of Power, an expose on the Council on Foreign Relations. It's sold over 100,000 copies. 2 books about the evidence against Darwin's theory of evolution, including Tornado in a Junkyard. He wrote for the New American Magazine for nearly 3 decades. His 2013 book, Truth is a Lonely Warrior, is a comprehensive primer on the New World Order, supplemented by his 2019 book, 13 Pieces of the Jigsaw. His newest release is COVID-19 and the Agendas to Come, Red Pilled. His website is jamesperloff.com. James, you spent 45 years as a registered nurse and 35 years as a journalist, and you're one of the most well-informed and knowledgeable people on false flags, hoaxes, and so-called conspiracy theories. So, James, it's great to have you on, and thank you for agreeing to this interview. Here we are. It's October 12th, 2020, and we've been living in this psyop for the past 8 months, and the way I see it, I know it's not a novel position to have, but the mass, the lockdowns, the riots, the Antifa, BLM, all of this is part of the same psyop. It's not separate, unrelated incidents. It's part of a coordinated top-down effort to subvert and destroy life as we know it. One of the main things I hear from people who continue to buy into the official narrative of this and other events and issues is stuff like, how are you going to get all these doctors and nurses to fake the death certificates and to, how are you going to get all these people in on the con? But that's really not how conspiracies work. What do you say to people who think like this, and not only in the instance of COVID, but with conspiracy in general?
Well, as far as COVID goes, there's a lot of doctors and nurses that aren't buying into the con, me being one. I'm a registered nurse for 45 years, although I retired last year before the COVID crisis hit. I quote this, and I've got this new book out, COVID-19 Red Pill. I really had to work morning, noon, and night to get this thing out. I said, if they're going to have a warp speed vaccine, I got to get a warp speed book out there. But I quote the British press there that 1,500 pediatricians wrote to the British government asking them to stop the lockdown. And just recently, 1,400 doctors and medical professionals in Belgium wrote to the Belgian government saying there is no emergency, that the lockdown should stop immediately. Even months ago, more than 600 doctors wrote to President Trump urging him to stop the lockdown, citing all the health damage was done by the lockdown, which was greatly outweighing that of the virus. You've probably seen interviews with nurse whistleblowers, doctor whistleblowers, Dr. Simone Gold. I quote countless docs in my book. In fact, it was just today, I tweeted out this Great Barrington Declaration, which is signed by numerous epidemiologists and other medical scholars calling for an end to the lockdown. So there's a lot who aren't faking anything. But as far as the incentives go, the New World Order, the Illuminati, whatever we call them, have always known that money makes the world go round. And they know that they can buy people. So they've been able to buy some hospitals and physicians by rewarding them. One whistleblower on this was Dr. Scott Regan, who was interviewed by Laura Ingraham on the Ingraham Angle on Fox News. He said that hospitals were getting a $13,000 bonus for COVID diagnoses. And Ron Paul is pointing out that if you reward something, you get more of it. And so there's a lot of financial incentives, a lot of pressure, and also doctors are being threatened with loss of licensure if they advocate alternatives like hydroxychloroquine. So there's a lot of pressure on people on their licenses, on their jobs, but a lot of brave whistleblowers are coming out, and now that they're out in numbers, I think we're going to see that happening much more, and it's going to be very hard for the mainstream media to sustain this narrative of a pandemic, which is any pandemic that you might have been able to make a case for it. It's certainly over at this point. They're mostly talking about positive PCR tests, which just mean the PCR test is positive, meaning you have a few fragments of the viral DNA, but it doesn't mean you're sick or dying. It might be, but certainly not the numbers that we saw in the early spring.
Yeah, and we've had some positive movement, it seems like, in the legal sphere, where there's been this group, Ohio Stands Up, recently filed a lawsuit. Attorney Thomas Wren says there's zero basis for a state of an emergency.
Right.
Based on what we know about the consequences the emergency order has caused to the physical, financial, and mental well-being of Ohioans and the vitality of Ohio communities. It's truly a crime against humanity. And the same sentiments were echoed by Dr. Reiner Fuellmich. I don't know if you've probably seen that video. Last time I checked, 1.2 million views.
Right.
So it does seem like we're getting some traction here, and people are waking up. It seems to be good news. What are your thoughts on these developments moving forward?
I'm very happy to see that, for example, Gretchen Whitmer has been overruled by, I believe it's the Supreme Court of Michigan, that said that all of her executive orders are unconstitutional going back to April. And then she said she was going to stand pat, but now the Attorney General in Michigan has said he's not going to enforce them. So I think that leaves it without any teeth. And then I'm sure you heard that in Pennsylvania, a federal judge ruled that the lockdown there was unconstitutional. And I live in Massachusetts. We've got a lawsuit here going against our governor, Charlie Baker. Charlie Baker, similar to Gretchen Whitmer, who invoked a 1945 law, our governor, Charlie Baker, the supreme law of the land is the Constitution, and a governor cannot overrule your rights with an executive order, but that's exactly what he's done. He's invoked this 1950 law, and the reason that law came about was because the Soviets exploded a nuclear bomb in 1949. So there was a thought that the governor should have powers if the Soviets attack us. Well, obviously the Soviets were not in that situation. This is a virus. That was not what that law was about. But he's using that to shut down the economy. And this is supposed to be, I'm sure you've heard this, but originally all they wanted to do was to shut things down so they can make room for the hospitals. And then they said, well, let's, when the COVID cases were coming, well, we need the lockdown to flatten the curve. Well, the curve has been flattened as far as deaths go. Deaths are way down. Look at the stats in Sweden or England, whether you got a lockdown or not. They're way, way down. Here in America, the death stats are way down. So now they've got to talk about cases in order to keep this going. But I feel very encouraged by the fact that more and more lawsuits are being brought against these governors. And of course, some judges are in the back pockets of the powers that be, but apparently not all of them are, because we've seen some success. And I'm encouraged to see more and more lawsuits and more red pill lawyers coming forward. I know that recently there were attorneys in Oklahoma who are suing over masks. Trudeau in California is being sued over the mask mandates. And we're seeing some progress. We're seeing traction in our favor, which I frankly wasn't really expecting. But I am delighted to see that development. Not that they don't have other bad things in store for us on the road, but at the moment we are seeing sort of a shift in the tide going in our favor.
October 10th, we got the World Health Organization who said that lockdowns shouldn't be the primary means of control of the virus. There was Dr. David Nabarro saying the only time we believe a lockdown is justified is to buy you time to reorganize and regroup. I mean, this seems like good news, but it seems to me also part of the script, right? I mean, we can't lock down. It hurts too many people. But here we have this great health passport for you, and you can download this and allow society to keep moving, and you can have your freedoms back. I mean, I heard you on Charles Moscovitz's podcast a little while back talking about Rice University and what they engineered, this bioengineering quantum tag using microneedles to indicate who's been vaccinated. I mean, this is mark of the beast stuff. Where do you think they're headed with this?
I think they're headed just for that. And yeah, I do quote Rice University stating that they were approached by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, that they wanted to develop this system where you get a digital tattoo. That's what they call it at Rice University School of Bioengineering. And they inject this tattoo. It's invisible to the naked eye, but it's injected with your vaccination. It can be read by a customized smartphone. So yeah, this is very dangerous stuff. They're moving us towards some dangerous objectives, which, you know, when we talk about the New World Order, we've talked for a long time about world government, and which means consolidation of power. We're seeing consolidation all over the place. We see these, the mega banks have merged over and over again. I mean, go back in time, the Warburg's Manhattan Bank merged with the Rockefeller's Chase Bank and became Chase Manhattan, and then Chase Manhattan merged with JP Morgan, became JP Morgan Chase, you know. And you see it in the media. You know, I'm a big fan of a 1937 book called America 60 Families by Ferdinand Lundberg. And he demonstrated that the media was under consolidated control in 1937 and under the control of the 60 richest families of America. And that was not a conspiracy theory in his part. He actually went through the records and he showed, okay, this family owns this newspaper, this family owns this newspaper chain. Like one newspaper chain in America that they didn't own was a Scripps Howard chain, which I imagine they eventually got control of anyway. But then by 1983, there were 50 corporations controlling all media in America. And now, well, they a couple of years ago talking about the big six, but now that CBS has merged with Viacom, it's the big five. So you've got them with, you know, News Corp and Disney and GE and Time Warner owning almost all the media in America. So if you turn on your cable TV, you see, you know, a couple 300 stations or something, but they're all owned by these same companies. So it doesn't really matter. I mean, there was a time when the Wall Street Journal was independent, but now it's owned by News Corp, you know, and National Geographic used to be an independent publication. It's no longer. Paramount Studios used to be an independent movie studio. No longer. It's owned by one of the big five. So there's complete consolidation, and that consolidation is the key. Consolidation of nations, like into the European Union, with a stepping stone toward world government. And you know, they were trying to pull the same thing off by turning NAFTA into the North American Union. It's all about consolidation, even within religion, the ecumenical movement, consolidate all religions. And once you consolidate everything, and you basically have like a single world government and a uniform media, then it's easy to control the world. And that's what they've been aiming at. I warned about that in my 1980 book, Shadows of Power. But of course, I was drawing from other authors like Gary Allen, whose 1970s book, None Dare Call It Conspiracy, what made me wake up. But that's where we're headed. And what's been so frightening about 2020, I mean, part of it is of course, is the disasters that brought upon us in 2020 of many variety. But I've never seen a bigger push towards this New World Order, a bigger push towards, you know, this global ID. You've got the Global ID 2020 Alliance, which with the Microsoft logo right on it. Bill Gates has been pushing for this, you know, a digital ID for a long time. And of course, once they've got your ID and you combine that with 5G, where the whole planet is covered with the Internet of Things and the surveillance state, we're really in a 1984 world where everybody's being tracked. Everybody can be controlled. Elon Musk, this is in mainstream media news, been talking about putting a chip in people's brains so they can connect to AI and the internet. This is really a dangerous situation. And the people who do this, they haven't got our good intentions at heart. They're talking about reducing world population by huge amounts. They're not interested in making people healthier. They may put a little, of course, they'll put some rhetoric on it to, you know, make it sound good, like this great economic reset. They say it's a great opportunity. I heard Prince Philip and the head of the World Bank calling it it's a great opportunity, this COVID crisis, to reform the world economic system. But you know what they're talking about is a cashless society where everybody would be under a uniform control. In fact, I'll end just a moment here, but back at the Bretton Woods Conference of 1944, when they established the World Bank, John Maynard Keynes proposed a world currency at that time called Bancor, but it was rejected at that conference because it was considered too radical for the nations of the world to accept. But we're really moving in that direction now. When they talk about world currency, of course, they're talking about a digital currency, and much easier to control people that way than if they have real money in their hands. So we move from gold to paper money now. This is just in the news just Most people probably missed it, but just a few days ago, the Fed announced they're not going to print money anymore, just like they're not making coins anymore. Now, some people might think, oh, great, the Fed's falling apart. They're not printing money. They're still inflating the currency, but they're just doing it digitally instead of with printing money. But taking away the printing money means they're moving into the digital sphere, and they want to make that a totality.
Yeah, and you're right. One of the most concerning things about this is the acceleration that has happened recently. I mean, you know, and also just the amount of gaslighting and the intensity of the gaslighting during all of this. I mean, you see articles in mainstream media that, you know, they bemoan the rise of suicides and overdoses and deaths of despair and that sort of thing. And it's like, well, yeah, you're complicit in it. I mean,
right.
They've been the ones pumping us full of fear and pumping up this insanity. And then wondering why people are going insane is just amazing to me. There's a quote, Theodore Dalrymple quote, "The purpose of communistic propaganda is not to persuade or convince, but to humiliate, and therefore the less it corresponds to reality, the better. When people are forced to remain silent, even when they're being told the most obvious lies, or when forced to repeat the lies themselves, they lose once and for all their sense of probity. To assent to obvious lies is to become evil oneself. One standing to resist anything is thus eroded and destroyed. A society of emasculated liars is easy to control." And they've been working on this for years. I mean, I can't even think of a more apt quote to describe the situation we're in regarding with regards to COVID. In your book, you detailed the agenda of the oligarchs, and you know, I think that they've been telling us what they want to do with us for a very long time, and they've really made their plans no secret. But could you tell us more about who are the main players here and what's their end game?
Well, I've had to speak really frankly, and I know this goes outside the sphere of reality for some people. You know, I actually grew up an agnostic, and I made fun of people's religious faith very easily when I was around 20 years old. And then I got into the New Age movement for about 10 years because I realized there was some spiritual dimension to life, and then finally became a Christian in the 80s. But I would have to say, without question, that the top players are Luciferians, if we're talking about people, and I think there's a spiritual realm above them. You go back to William Guy Carr. He was in Canadian intelligence in the 1950s. He wrote what I think, to me, is still the best summary of the New World Order. It was called Pawns in the Game. How he did it in the 1950s is amazing to me because there was no internet back then. So he had to do this through his personal contacts and his personal resources, but he went through everything. I mean, he talked about the Spanish Civil War. He knew the infiltration of communism into society. He knew everything. And I was just amazed. But then Ted Gunderson came out. You know, he was a former agent in charge of the FBI office in Los Angeles in the 1970s with over 700 FBI personnel under him. Well, he went independent after he left the FBI. He warned people, and he said that William Guy Carr is right. He says these people are Luciferians at the top. They actually worship Lucifer. And you can see this in, I'm sure a lot of your viewers have seen Alex Jones' tape of the Bohemian Grove and the cremation of care, where they either engage in a mock human sacrifice or a real human sacrifice. But these are world leaders. I mean, we're talking about people like Bechtel executives and Bill Clinton and Dick Cheney, who have taken part in these occult, ritualistic human sacrifice ceremonies, and it's real. It's been happening since the 19th century, the Bohemian Grove. And one that really hit a lot of people very hard was Ronald Bernard, the Dutch banker. He was one of the top currency manipulators in Europe, and he was taken to the Church of Satan by his fellow banksters, and he was asked to take part in child ritual sacrifice. He couldn't stomach it, and he went public at his own risk. And his interviews, which are in Dutch and they're translated into English, are viral. You know, you can't deny it. These people are Luciferian. And, you know, a lot of people, when I was a hippie, we used to always think that it was just money that drove these people. We didn't have much money ourselves, of course. So, we'd look at these rich people like the Rockefellers and say, well, they're just driven by money. They want to get richer and richer and richer. That's why they're doing it. But actually, ultimately, this is an evil thing. I've used these metaphors before, but like there's no real financial gain in chemtrailing people. You're much better off letting people be healthy so they can buy your products. If you're just interested in making money, there's better ways to do it than killing people. So these people, money, they use money as an incentive to buy politicians and buy newscasters. They pay them a lot of money to lie. And so money's part of the program, but it's not the ultimate. The ultimate is very evil. And we see this in their population control agenda that Bill Gates has become one of the chief spokesmen for.
Yeah, last week there was this House Resolution 1154. I don't know if you caught this. It's meant to condemn QAnon and related conspiracy theories. Now, I'm no Q guy, but they seem to be doing, what they seem to be doing here is lumping all ideas that run counter to the narrative as conspiracy theory and labeling them things like anti-Semitic and dangerous hate speech and insinuating that they necessarily lead to violence, thereby justifying the FBI stepping in to curtail free speech and erode our freedoms more and more. Is this an accurate picture of what you think is going on here?
Yeah, that's a pretty good description of what the tactics that they're using. Of course, it's all nonsense. We're just describing the truth. As far as anti-Semitism goes, I'm half Jewish myself. The Perloff family was originally called Perlovsky. We were on my father's side. We were Russian Jews, immigrated to the United States in 1905. Was in 1904 to 1905. The family was gradually coming over. My mother was not Jewish; she was Western European. Her father was a Freemason, so it's kind of a good match in a way, because the Freemasons have always been kind of subservient to the Zionist bankers anyway. They give the Freemasons a few rewards, financial rewards, promotions, and things like that. They'll go along with the agenda. But yeah, they've tried to characterize everything as hate speech if you go against their agenda. And it's interesting. I read Kevin Ryan pointing out that the word conspiracy theorist never appeared in the media before the CIA designated that term in 1967 to describe people who would disagree with the Warren Commission. He did some research and found that if you looked at the New York Times, the Washington Post, they never used the word conspiracy theorist prior to the CIA making that designation, but after that it started appearing hundreds of times. So the word conspiracy theorist is one of those Pavlovian trigger words. It makes people think, oh, this isn't true. And the one they love to use is fact checking. We fact check this, but if you fact check the fact checkers, you find, for example, PolitiFact, their prime financial benefactors been the Gates Foundation. So of course they're going to fact check stories about Bill Gates and say they're fake news. So you got to follow the money and understand how these people are working. But this type of propaganda is not new. It goes back a long time in history.
Oh, every time these elite globalists get together to do these tabletop war games, I know that we lowly cattle are in for some troubled times. You look at Agenda 21, Event 201, and now the Transition Integrity Project. And I don't know how much you've dug into that, but it forecasts some real violence and unrest should Trump be elected.
Oh, yeah.
Have you looked into that, and what do you think?
Yeah, it seems to me that we might be in for some violence in November, no matter what. Now, in my book, I said I'm not going to try and predict the outcome of the election because I honestly don't know if they're ready for the Democrats to take over with a Bolshevik gun control type society, or they feel they can do better with Trump convincing his deplorable followers, the deplorables, to take the global vaccine. I know that Chuck Baldwin, whom I quote in my book, former presidential candidate for the Constitution Party, said that if Hillary Clinton had been president, this lockdown would never have gotten away as much as it did it with Trump. Sometimes a conservative leader can drive the agenda better than a leftists, because if Hillary had ordered the lockdown, there would have been a lot more resistance. I think that that's a proper point. So I don't know about the outcome of the election. My best guess at this moment, and we're talking only about 3 weeks away, is that no matter what happens, there's going to be violence. Right now, the chances of dying from COVID, if you're 20 to 49, I think it's your chance of surviving COVID are about 99.996%. And that's even according to the CDC with their inflated statistics. Right now, it's being pointed out by more and more doctors, and we started talking about this early on, that there's no emergency at this point. And the mass media is trying to keep up the scare, saying, oh, 10,000 new COVID cases, and all they're talking about is PCR tests, which a PCR test, even the New York Times is questioning the PCR test now in their August 29th issue. So how long can they keep it up? I think they can keep it up for about 3 more weeks until the election. And then I think with the election, just like what happened at the George Floyd incident, the George Floyd I can't breathe incident, all of a sudden, and this is right after the death rates had dropped, for 2 weeks, we didn't hear about COVID. We really didn't. For 2 weeks after the George Floyd incident, all we heard was the protests and the violence. And then COVID reemerged. They had a new scenario, which is no longer about the deaths, it's about the cases. Well, now they've got this new dilemma where even the cases scenario won't hold up. So I think they will go into a violent streak after the election, regardless of who wins. Because if you look at it, if Trump wins, the Soros, Antifa, Black Lives Matter people will be back on the streets looting and destroying as they did before. But if Biden wins, Trump may challenge that, saying that the mail-in votes were fraudulent, and then they'll be on the streets for violence. So I think it's a two-headed coin. They're going to have violence. I think it's going to be a violent November, no matter what happens here in America. And then my anticipation would be, and this is just an educated guess, would be once the winter comes, Antifa and the Black Lives Matter will have to retreat indoors, at least in the northern climates. It's going to be too cold to carry on the riots. And at that point, they'll say, well, flu season is here. We have a resurgence of COVID. We have to go back into 100% lockdown. And then they'll say, well, we'll lock down, but if you take the vaccine, which is ready now, the new Bill Gates approved vaccine is ready now, you can avoid being locked down. That's kind of how I think they probably have it on the drawing board, but I don't know. That's just a guess on my part.
Yeah, I think back to the strange things that we have heard during the course of this issue. And I remember that one interview with Bill Gates there sitting with his wife talking about how we are going to pay attention to the next phase of this development, like forecasting, telling us that it's going to be worse the next time. I mean, it was just a very strange comment to make. And it really seems, looking at it now, a threatening kind of thing where he's forecasting this is what will happen.
Right. And I have that quote about getting their attention, which, by the way, he says with a little smirk on his face. And there are other quotes to other news commentators that he's made about how there's going to be resurgence of death in the autumn from COVID because we're not locking down hard enough, believe it or not. We have too much freedom, according to Bill Gates, so we're going to have a resurgence of death. And he's also told Stephen Colbert, he says, I call this pandemic 1, now we have to get ready for pandemic 2. I take Bill Gates pretty seriously. I don't believe he is predicting things based on some sort of scientific forecast. I think he knows what's coming. And so I am very concerned that there may be a resurgence of death. In fact, in my book, COVID-19 Red Pilled, which I should probably describe what's in this book at some point before we finish off. I have just one sentence in bold to call attention. I say that, I'm talking about how the death rates have been exaggerated and how you got to put this in perspective compared to other pandemics, which are even worse than this one. And I talk about, the tampering with death certificates. And, but in all of this, the one bold sentence I have is that we I'm making a disclaimer here, we may see an actual resurgence of death rates later on. And there's a number of ways it could do this. It could release a new bioweapon of some type, or, there has been some credible argumentation made that they're going, 5G has not been slowed down by this economic depression at all. And there is evidence. We're talking about, he's a Japanese gentleman, and I've never heard his name pronounced right, but let's see, Shigeaki Hakasui, I'm trying to pronounce that right. He was the president of the Harmonics Corporation. He did an article on electromagnetic frequencies, and which relate to 5G, of course, and which is much stronger than Wi-Fi. And he said that at 60 gigahertz, 98% of EMFs, electromagnetic frequency waves, are absorbed by atmospheric oxygen. We've always wondered why it was that in Wuhan we saw people suddenly dropping dead on the street. And we know that Wuhan was the rollout city for 5G in China. We haven't seen people dropping dead in America, but on the other hand, they haven't turned on 5G to 60 gigahertz yet. And that's another concern I have. I do quote arguments both for and against 5G and other theories like Dr. Andrew Kaufman's in the book, because I want this book to be an open forum on possible explanations of what's going on. I don't have a subtle viewpoint myself, so I wanted to give voice to many, but I am concerned that Bill Gates knows something is going to happen that is going to increase the death rates to frighten people into accepting more lockdown, mandatory vaccination, digital ID, cashless society, and the Great Reset.
To get more into your book, it's divided into 5 different sections: the lockdown, the human impact of the lockdown, the methodology of panic, theories about the origins of the virus, the deep state's endgame, and what may lie ahead. When did you first realize that something was amiss with this story, and what do you hope people get from the book?
Well, I guess you might say, you go back to April, I wrote an article, a lengthy blog post called COVID-19 Red Pilled. And it was getting a lot of views. And as new information came out, we've learned about Event 201, for example, all kinds of new information came out. I kept expanding that post. And then some people said, well, how do we know which information is new? I said, well, I'll italicize that. But eventually it got to be long. And so the book is 200 pages long, which is too long to read online. And so I said, about the time of the George Floyd incident, I said, I got to just start putting this into hard copy, because you never know when digital information is going to be gotten rid of. I mean, it's Orwellian. That's what they did in Winston Smith's Ministry of Truth. They just took information and deleted it. And we're seeing YouTube on this incredible crusade of censorship right now. I never know when my own digital work will be disappeared. So I figured, let's put this onto a hard copy that people can access. And so I really worked flat out starting in May, and by August the book was out. But it's 27 chapters. We cover everything. We cover, the various ways of inflated the death rates. We talk about the impact of the lockdown, physical, health-wise, psychological, economic, destruction of civil liberties. We get into the ways that have panicked the public through the falsification of numbers. We get into the various theories that we mentioned, and we talk about the various agendas: the population reduction agenda, the economic reset, the cashless society, the global ID. I've got a whole chapter that's on Bill Gates. And by the way, I just want to commend James Corbett. His 4-part series, Who is Bill Gates, is the best thing I've ever seen on Gates, and everything he does, it's 100% documented. And in this book, by the way, I should mention that I have almost 300 endnotes. So everything is documented in my book also. I think that's a must if you're going to argue about this, because people always say, well, where's the proof? How do we know that's not fake news? So everything, you've got the article that I'm drawing from, the author, the name of the article, the date, and the link. So you can look it up yourself to see if this really was said or not. And it was. It's all right there. And then the last section is on possible scenarios. And also I try to end on a hope of a note and encouragement for people, because as we were talking about earlier, there are successful lawsuits. There's protests taking place around the world. There's more and more doctors coming forward, as well as politicians and even police officers and sports stars speaking out against these lockdowns. So I quote a number of them. in the final section, because I want to give people, I don't want to leave people feeling depressed, like at the end of George Orwell's 1984, when Winston Smith simply looks at the screen and says, "I love Big Brother." We give people the idea that, yes, we are fighting against this thing, and this is also something that's prophesied actually in the Bible. The first thing I say at the final chapter is, the Bible does not end with the Antichrist, it ends with Christ. So we may have some tough times ahead, but we want to do God's will. We want to fight the Luciferian system. And I definitely believe the good guys win in the end. Not to borrow a cliche from old Hollywood movies, but I do believe the good guys win in the end.
Yeah, it's I think now more so than ever, there's been a spiritual awakening that that a lot of people are going through, and I know that this has bolstered my own sense of spirituality and faith. To be able to realize that you are on the side of good, fighting what is absolutely demonic, evil forces.
Mm-hmm.
That is what we are up against. Um, the transformation that you've made during your own life is interesting to me, James, and something that I can relate to as well. You were a devout atheist at one point, and believed you found God around the 1980s. And I know I've heard many stories on how people have awakened to God and to Logos with being exposed to all the information that is now available to us in the alternative media. Give us an idea about your trajectory there and how you changed, how you made that transformation.
Again, we didn't have any, we weren't churchgoers when I grew up. We weren't, God was not part of our household at all. And then, but I was pretty messed up, and that's for a number of reasons. I messed up in my youth and very unhappy. And then I got into a New Age cult seeking some resolution of my own difficulties in life. But this is a very anti-Christian cult that I was involved with from in the 1970s up to about 1982. And then one of the things that actually started drawing me towards Christ and the Christian faith was actually Gary Allen's book, Then They're Called a Conspiracy, because not only did that book make sense, but I found that it was the Christians who were fighting the system. And I said, that's interesting. That was the first time I had a kind of a positive outlook on Christians, And I just found myself being drawn towards going towards church. Actually, I was in the evangelical churches for about 30 years, more than 30 years. But in 2017, I actually became Orthodox Christian. Orthodox is kind of an interesting part of Christianity. It's the Eastern Orthodox faith, right? Over here in the West, we think we've got a choice between the Catholic Church, which many people rightfully see has been corrupted from within, or the Protestants who have splintered into, hundreds, if not thousands of denominations. And it gets very confusing. But the Eastern Orthodox, I found, had kept the original form of worship since Constantine legalized it in the 4th century. And I was amazed. I said, what? You mean there's a form of Christianity that hasn't changed over all these years, hasn't splintered off one group after another, right? So I was drawn to that. Now, I do have some problems right now during the COVID crisis with the fact that many of the Orthodox churches they're compromised in the way they do their services to bow down before state regulations, but not all of them are. And I do quote in my book a number of religious leaders, Catholic, evangelical, Orthodox, and even Muslim, regarding what's going on, people who are really awake. And there are Orthodox leaders that say, we should not be locking down and taking orders, these unconstitutional orders from the government. That's where I stand. But unfortunately, a lot of the churches are. But yeah, that's kind of my journey was through an unhappy life, through from agnosticism through New Age, still anti-Christian, to accepting Christianity towards the most basic traditional forms of Christianity. I guess you might say I got more traditional as time went on, but it wasn't just because I was getting older, because as I studied and did seek the truth, what brought me to Christianity was honestly, it was the search for truth, just as the search for truth led me to start writing for the New American Magazine in 1985 and writing the books I've written on geopolitics. I'm always looking for the truth, whether it's about 9/11 or any other issue. I'm always looking for the truth. And that's been kind of the guidepost for me.
Yeah, and I really appreciate how you tackle taboo topics. And I want to give my audience a little bit more of a sense of your other work that you've done on the Council of, on Foreign Relations, um, your other books. Could you tell us a little bit about that for those who aren't familiar with your other work?
Oh, well, thank you. I appreciate that very much. Yeah, in 1985, started with the New American Magazine, which is still is the, the magazine of the John Birch Society. And I know a lot of people criticize the John Birch Society as they did, 50 years ago. But the Birch Society in the 1980s was perhaps the only really organized American um, society that was battling the New World Order in an organized way, and saying that there was indeed a conspiracy behind the American government. And the magazine asked me to write an article in 1988 on the Council on Foreign Relations. That actually became my book, The Shadows of Power, because the length of the article would have filled more than one copy of the New American Magazine. And then the late 90s, I got very interested in this whole question of how man came about, because I'd been schooled in Darwinism and thought that man, the universe came about by chance. And then read a very interesting book called What is Creation Science by Dr. Henry Morris, and a co-author. And I was suddenly said, wow, wait a minute, there's a lot of evidence against Darwin's theory. So I don't have the books within reach, but I wrote a book called Tornado in a Junkyard, which is a very extensive refutation of Darwin's theory, not based on me, it's based on scientists who have come forward and just pointed out the holes in Darwin's theory. And I wrote a shorter version called The Case Against Darwin, who only have, for people who only have time for a short read. Then I was doing a lot of radio shows on this and podcasts, but after 9/11, I realized that the geopolitical situation was an emergency, and we were dealing with a very distressing situation. We're being drawn into unjustified war after unjustified war based on the false flag of 9/11. And so I got back into that, and I did write a book called Truth is a Lonely Warrior. I had a lot of, family issues, health issues, things going on that delayed this, but finally came out in 2013. Truth is a Lonely Warrior is a primer on the New World Order. I tried to cover everything. I tried the false flags, Council of Foreign Relations, the Federal Reserve, what happened in Vietnam, 9/11, vaccines, secret societies, weather control. I tried to be pretty A to Z on that, but I found there were some areas I hadn't covered yet as I continued to blog on my blog site, which is jamesperloff.com. I took 13 of my best blog posts and put them into a book called 13 Pieces of the Jigsaw last year, 2019, kind of supplement what I'd written in Truth is a Lonely Warrior. And actually, I was writing a book on 9/11 intensely. I mean, man, I did a lot of work on this. You wouldn't believe. I have got it must be about 800 pages long, my basic research on 9/11, because I wanted to set the record straight on that. I wanted to, I'd written some blog posts on 9/11, which in retrospect, I regretted, because even though there was good information there, I also was too speculative. And I said, I want to be not speculating on 9/11. I want this to be like in a courtroom, and everything is decided by proven fact, which is difficult to do with 9/11. But that's what I was working on. I was in the middle of that book, or towards, I guess, 2/3 of the way through it, when COVID hit. And sometimes you have to shift gears. And even though I invested a lot of time in that 9/11 book, I said, you know what? They're pushing, they got the foot on the accelerator, and they're pushing for the New World Order right now with COVID. They're taking down our civil liberties. They've stopped the Bill of Rights and most of its planks. They're really going all out for it right now in 2020. And so I just stopped everything I was doing on the book on 9/11, and I worked flat out on this book on COVID. And so I hope that it'll be a good resource for people. It's been getting big sales on Amazon. If Amazon decides to censor it, I do have a separate printer working on it, and I have a Power of Prophecy down in Texas is selling it, and I'm working on other secondary sellers, so that if the book is censored in the more mainstream avenues of distribution, that I'll still be able to distribute through alt media distribution sources.
So the main place to go to get your work is jamesperloff.com. Anywhere else you would
Yeah, you could go there to find places. Right now, it is on Amazon. It's even a couple of days ago, it ranked that it was the #1 bestseller on Amazon for respiratory diseases. I don't think they've got a COVID category, but respiratory disease was a #1 bestseller, and that's not the first time it's been ranking that. It's continued to sell very well, better than I expected on Amazon. Yeah, that's it's a one good thing about Amazon is if you're in a foreign country. I actually heard from a guy 3 days after I uploaded this onto Amazon. I heard from a guy in Japan who'd already read it, because Amazon's all over the world. You know, they can give you the book in Italy or Canada or Germany or England, or Australia, as long as they've got an Amazon in that country, you can get it through them. So I have to say that they have a commendable distribution service. If you try to ship a book to Australia, I learned this the hard way from America. It's very expensive. So I appreciate the fact that they are featuring it right now. It's not the only one. They at the very beginning of COVID, you know, Amazon was locking down tight on anything that had to do with COVID. But then there was this guy, Alex Berenson, reporter for the New York Times, wrote a book criticizing the lockdown. Amazon censored it, and then Elon Musk came out in favor of the author and said, you know, maybe Amazon should be investigated as a monopoly. And all of a sudden, Amazon lightened up. And there's a number of anti-lockdown books, in addition to mine, right now on Amazon. That may change in the future, but for right now, it's available there. But Power of Prophecy down in Texas, if you're looking to support a nice conservative organization, you know, they have the book in stock.
Very good. I'll include those links in the description to the video. And
Thanks.
James, I really appreciate you coming on and sharing your knowledge with us. Very grateful to have you on today.
Well, I'm grateful to you, Rob, and to all the alt media platforms. People are providing platforms, because without that, we're the last line of defense against the mainstream media, which, as we were talking about earlier in this broadcast podcast, we're talking about how they've consolidated the control over that. So we're the only independent journalism that's left in America. We're the only ones who are not motivated by 6- and 7-digit salaries. We're motivated by the desire to bring people the truth, which is what journalism should be about, right? It should be about integrity and telling the facts, you know, and not just conforming to an agenda because you're getting big bucks from these sources. So
yeah, imagine
thank
telling
you.
the truth. Yeah, there are so many voices out there contributing to the truth movement.
Mm-hmm.
And you know, no matter how small the voice is, we get the numbers, and we keep people talking about this, and and keep the pressure on them.
Right, and that's pleasing to God. I tell you, you know, Jesus Christ himself said many, many times, I tell you the truth. And, you know, God, we know, is a God of truth, and Satan's a deceiver and a liar. So when you tell the truth, you're really on the side of God, and you're really on the winning team. So even though the powers that be have the money on their side, we've got the truth on our side. And let's keep pushing for the truth to win out over the money.
Absolutely. Thank you very much, James.
Okay, thank you, Rob.
Okay, bye now.
Bye-bye.